Hello and welcome to another video in which I'm going to be talking about the T-34, which if you don't know, is a tank used by the Soviet Union in World War II. You see, the T-34 was a very good tank, and this can be judged in, I like to think of these as the three main judgmental areas of a tank, which quite frankly is armour, speed or manoeuvrability or kind of just mobility, and then there's also the gun. And did I say armor? Yes, I think armor was in the, yes, armor, gun, speed, mobility, maneuverability, all of that stuff. So the armor was decent. It wasn't bad. It wasn't the best, but it was decent. It got the job done. It was up to 2 inches, about 6 centimeters. On probably around the front of the tank, it was very decent, around 2 inches. The sides were a bit less, and the back, of course, is always the worst, but that can be expected. So the armour, it was decent. The gun started off with a 76mm, which is, that's decent as well, pretty good, That gets the job done as well. That can penetrate Tiger 1s. Not sure about Tiger 2s, but probably Panthers, which the T-34 was up against in the later areas of the war against Germany, or in that sector of the war. So that's the gun. Had a machine gun as well, 7.62mm machine gun, suppressing infantry, that kind of stuff. And the speed. Very good speed. It was quite a light and manoeuvrable tank, and so it could get up to about 51 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour, which is a very good speed, especially for something holding that kind of gun, which was a very good gun. And especially for something with that kind of armor, which was very good armor. And you see, the thing I've said about all of those three categories is that they're not bad. They're decent. All three of these things, all three of these categories, armour, gun and speed, they're all decent. They're all good. Now, that is what makes the T-34 so unique. It was pretty much, there's a few others, but it was mainly the only tank well, another thing about the armour actually, it was sloped, which had been done before by the French, a little bit, and some other nations, but it was the first tank to be mass-produced with sloped armour, which was a very good technique that the Brits didn't really catch on to until even after the war, but we'll get to that later. But the T-34, right, where was I? Yes, the three main points. They were all decent, which makes it a unique tank in the tanks of World War II. Because you look at the Brits, you look at the Americans, you look at the Germans, they could have really good armour, a really good gun, but the speed, just went at 5 miles an hour or something absolutely pathetic. And then perhaps you look at the M3 Stuart, the American one, speed was through the roof, but then the gun and the armour, well, it's a light little manoeuvrable tank, it doesn't really have that kind of stuff. So great speed, not the armour, not that, and then maybe there's a German tank with a brilliant gun and brilliant speed, but the armor's just, not really there, like maybe the Marder 3 or something. And there's all these tanks that all have things that just don't make up all three categories to be equal. And I think the T-34 is the one tank that actually does that. And you've really got to give it to the Russians, because that's exactly what they needed 1941 onwards with Operation Barbarossa, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in the biggest land invasion of all time. That's quite impressive, isn't it? But yeah, so the T-34 was an averagely good tank, which is what made it, quite frankly, so good. And another thing is that the Russians needed to mass produce lots and lots of tanks. So, no, it wasn't comfortable inside. It was very crude spacing, you were quite cramped, and it was hard to get in and out. Actually, I'm not sure about that, but, I mean, it was cramped, it wasn't comfortable, but the Russians didn't care about that. They just wanted something that would kill German tanks and have enough armour to stop the German tanks killing it. They didn't care about the people inside. As long as they loaded the gun, moved it around, pulled a few levers, toggled a few toggles, and pressed a few buttons, that was all that mattered. So it worked, and because of this, the Russians could just mass produce hundreds and thousands, okay, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but just heaps and heaps and heaps of them, to the point where because the T-34, by the end of the war... Oh, that's right, the gun, yes. In 1944, spring 1944, they actually changed it to an 85mm gun. Yeah, it was 85mm gun, which is even better than the 75mm gun. Of course. 76, sorry, that's what it was, 76mm gun originally, then they changed it to the 85, which was great. A bigger gun. You could always do with a bigger gun, couldn't you? So they changed it to the 85mm, which was, yeah, quite good. Anyway, where was I? Right. Yes, by the end of the war, or around 1944, 45, 43, when the T-34s were coming up against Tiger 1s, King Tigers, or... I actually never knew this, but you could also call them Royal Tigers, which I think is quite cool. King Tigers, Royal Tigers, or just Tiger 2s, which is just the second version of the Tiger 1. And then you've got the Panthers as well. Those three German tanks were very good. Debatably, those three could be in the top 5 best tanks of World War II, because they were just so good. But the thing was, they were so good, they were just so good that it was so complex, complicated, and expensive, and mechanically just such a mix, and it has to be all handmade, and it was just so complicated and hard and expensive to make them that the Germans couldn't make a lot of them. That was just the thing. And and they did actually have a few flaws as well. But apart from that, they were really good tanks. But as I said, they were just so hard to make and so expensive to make, and the mechanics were so complicated, and they all had to be hand. And so they were so good, but they were so hard to make, and they couldn't make lots and lots and lots of them like the Russians could. And by the end of World War II, the Germans needed lots and lots and lots of tanks, instead of just like small amounts of high quality ones, which is what they had, which was a bit of a shame. Like, it took 6 T-34s to take out 1 Tiger 1. That's not even a Tiger 2. That's a Tiger 1. 6 T-34s. But the Russians could do that. They could put 10, 11, 15 T-34s against 1 Tiger 1, and then they would have another 30 in the production line to just come off the other day and fill their spots. That's how easy it was. The Russians knew what they were dealing with, knew how to react. They knew how to make a proper medium tank. It was probably the first medium tank that the world had seen, and it has gone on to inspire lots of other tank designs around the world, and it's actually still used by third world countries in their armies, or should I say armies which perhaps do not have the potential, the potential for lots of great tanks. It's still being used by armies. That's the basic point I'm trying to say. The T-34 is still being used today. And the Russians just knew the enemy, they knew the situation, they realized what qualities they needed and what quantities of men and steel they had, and they just made an all-round good tank. And that was the T-34.